in some ways, not always, but in some ways, this flies in the face of some of the traditionally held theories around mental illness. So in the book, you kind of detail a lot of them. The biopsychosocial model comes to mind, the monoamine hypothesis, let's say, of depression, where, the through line for why someone might be depressed is that they have some sort of chemical imbalance. So they're either, presynaptic or postsynaptic or, intersynaptic. There's not enough serotonin, let's say, uptake in the postsynaptic neuron, which is why the development of things like SSRIs and SNRIs are we'll say, are in abundance in the way that they are, because this is sort of like the consensus in terms of why depression exists. But when we look at it from a slightly different lens, where we say maybe it's the mitochondrial efficiency and potentially dysfunction of, let's say, the neuron, or wherever, in whatever area of the brain, I think we can start to all of these different proposals for why mental illness happen start to make a lot more sense. And which is why, we started off the conversation saying, yeah, there's a lot of heterogeneity between something like depression and bipolar and OCD and anxiety. Like, they all present very differently. But when we kind of come down to it, it's either an overactivity, maybe via calcium regulation, via neurotransmitter, like the inhibitory neurotransmitters or the excitatory neurotransmitters that we talked about, or there's an absence, like there's an underactivity of the brain or an absence of specific functions in the brain. So I wanted maybe your comments on maybe your thoughts on how if at all, the biopsychosocial model, things like the monoamine hypothesis, which is still very largely accepted as the root cause for depression, how that bumps up against what we're talking about now, which is there's the mitochondria, which you might argue is the heart of, or the soul of, metabolism. When that goes awry, this is where we can see all these different disorders sort of play out in a different way.
Yeah, excellent point. So the brain energy theory actually doesn't replace the biopsychosocial model, and it doesn't really argue against a lot of those different assertions, although the chemical imbalance theory has actually kind of already been disproven. And some of your listeners may be aware of a study.
Well, we've had other psychiatrists on that have talked about this, so they're aware of it. But I think in practice, if you go to your medical doctor and you say, listen, I've been depressed, here's my 2 weeks, I've had a major depressive episode, can't sleep, all the things that, let's say, would qualify you for an MDD, you're probably going to walk out with some Zoloft or Wellbutrin or Prozac. Like, you're probably going to walk out with something like that. So in the clinical literature doesn't necessarily support that, but the practice is still very much at play.
Absolutely. And if you ask your doctor, why are you giving me a pill? Your doctor is very likely to still say, well, because you've got a chemical imbalance in your brain.
Correct.
And it's a serotonin imbalance. We know that. And that's why I'm giving you this medication that's going to increase your serotonin levels. And that's how it all works out. So that has, again, that's largely been disproven. And if you ask just basic common sense questions about that theory easily falls apart within seconds. And so one of the obvious ways to disprove that theory is that we know that medications like Zoloft and Prozac actually increase serotonin levels in the brain within hours.
Right.
Within hours of taking them. Mm-hmm. And yet anybody who's taken them and benefited from them knows that it doesn't work right away. It doesn't work in an hour. You have to take it for several weeks before it really starts to work. And so right away,
if at all,
if it even works. And unfortunately, if you look at longitudinal studies of all comers, all the people in the world who are taking SSRIs for depression, only about maybe 10% get a full and complete and lasting remission of their depressive symptoms. Only about 10%.
With the only intervention being the medication.
Yes. So looking to a pill to fix your chemical imbalance is not a very effective solution. And trust me, I know that some people might hear that as, Chris Palmer's being a quack, or Chris Palmer's,
telling me it's all in my head,
dissing the field. Well, I'm definitely not telling anyone it's all in their head, because I believe mental disorders are real disorders, and I see them torment people and really cause suffering and impairment. So I am not at all questioning the validity of mental disorders like depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, and others. They are real as far as I'm concerned. They ruin people's lives sometimes, and we need more effective treatments. But our current treatments fail to work for far too many people. And if you question that, or if you think I'm being too pessimistic, the hard fact is that mental disorders are now the leading cause of disability in the United States and throughout the world. The entire planet. More people are disabled from mental disorders. And guess what the diagnosis is? The number one diagnosis that disables more people on the planet is depression. Plain old depression. And we have all these SSRIs and other antidepressants. And we've got talk therapy, and we've got shock therapy, and we've got all of these therapies, and they're not working for so many people. And we need a better way to understand these disorders and better ways to treat these disorders.
I could not agree more. And I think when we think about, that's a shocking, I actually thought that it was higher. I thought it was about 30% efficacy when you're taking, let's say, an antidepressant, which I was going to say is about the same as the placebo effect, right? Or it's about the same as exercise, because we know that individuals that have depression that start exercising or some type of light movement, we see an amelioration, at least in the severity, the frequency, and the duration of their symptoms. But you might also bring that back to why exercise is such a powerful antidepressant, let's say, focusing on, depression for a moment, is that we are helping, improve the metabolic efficiency and conditioning of a person, which is relayed through the musculoskeletal system. And then of course it's going to the motor cortex, the efferents and the afferents that are coming down from the brain. So your brain is getting healthier. And of course we can get into BDNF and all that other stuff, but maybe not for the purpose of this conversation. But I think that the exercise piece, why that's so efficacious, in part is because we are improving the metabolic condition of the individual as well.
Absolutely. So I just want to clarify that difference, because you said 30% remission. And in fact, you're right. In short-term clinical trials, so 12-week clinical trials, about 30% do go into remission. When I said 10%, I'm talking about over the long run. I'm talking about one study in particular that followed hundreds of patients, all treated at academic medical centers over 12 years, and only 10% remained symptom-free, 90%. So even if you've got an antidepressant that looks like it puts your depression into remission within 12 weeks, even if you keep taking that medicine, within a couple of years, there is a high likelihood your depression is going to come back. And then they're going to say your antidepressant pooped out. Or they're going to say, oh, you must have been stressed, or maybe you were drinking too much, or maybe you stopped your pills and you weren't taking them like you were told to take them. We come up with all sorts of reasons, but
which usually fall on the patient.
Oh,
like
of course.
All the things you just said is like, well, you were drinking. Oh, you must have habituated to it. Oh, you probably weren't doing everything I told you to do. And then the patient's like, well, I suck. This must be the life that I'm meant to live.
Yes, which is a great message. It's so compassionate and sympathetic for the healthcare system to deliver that message to somebody with depression.
Right.
I'm being sarcastic.
Yeah, I was going to say insert sarcasm. Yeah.
Absolutely insert sarcasm. It is the most cruel thing that we could be doing to people who are suffering and who already have trouble with confidence and self-esteem and everything else. the great news that you were getting to, the great news about this theory is that we already know lots of ways for people to improve their metabolism. And improving metabolism can improve brain function and reduce or eliminate symptoms of mental illness. And these can include interventions, like you said, like exercise, diet, and other strategies. And sometimes these simple interventions can make a huge difference for people with mental disorders.